American Christianity is dying, and it's a slow, painful death. But unlike what many people believe, it's not the atheists or the secularists or the Satanists or the pagans that have been killing it. Its death is coming at its own hand. It's the suicide of American Christianity. You know, it's no secret that church attendance has been in decline for the past 30 or 40 years. This is a documented historical fact. And it's not that Christianity is declining. It's that church attendance is declining. Membership in mainline denominations is declining. People who are following the more fundamentalist or evangelical doctrines, those numbers are declining, and they have been declining steadily year after year after year. And it kind of doesn't make sense to me why so many church leaders are clueless about this, and they are trying everything they possibly can to increase their church membership. You know, I mean, they're giving it a good go. You know, they're updating their music and their technology, and even things that come down to stage presence. You know, they literally are throwing everything they can think of at trying to increase membership in the church. And it's not working. It's still in decline, and it seems like there's nothing that they can do to reverse this process. But the problem is not going to be solved with fancy lights and rock and roll music and hipster preachers and a hipster Jesus. The problem's not going to be solved if you're just going to put a new coat on American Christianity. It's not going to happen. I don't care what you throw at it. I don't care, you know, how charismatic your speakers are, how wonderful your light show is, how awesome your band is. That's just a veneer. The age group that's leaving the church faster than any other demographic are millennials, young millennials and older millennials, and to a lesser extent, Generation X, such as it is. And they're leaving not because they're not satisfied with the production, with the show, which in many churches, that's what it has come down to, a production and a show. And not saying that there's anything inherently wrong with that, okay? But that's not, like I said earlier, that's not working. Why they're leaving is the younger generations, because of the availability of information via the internet, via their own social circles, and as well their own developing empathy and sympathy towards their neighbors, which, by the way, is decidedly a teaching of Christ. They are rejecting the three major things that the evangelical fundamental church can't seem to get past, and that is homosexuality, misogyny, or actually I should say homophobia, misogyny, and Islamophobia. And by far the biggest problem is homophobia, fear of homosexuals. No child is born hating or not understanding homosexuals. Homosexuality is found in over 1,500 species, which makes it more natural than not. Then there's misogyny. The church has a horrible history on how it treats women, how it keeps them subservient, and we'll get into that a little later. But some of the behavior is horrible. It's deplorable. And then you have Islamophobia, and Islamophobia is the birth of what happened on 9/11. A lot of people get their understanding of Islam from 9/11, and they label terrorists, they label Muslims terrorists, all of them. and they've defaced property. And this is deplorable. It's horrible. In all the work that the church has done to try to attract the younger generation, they have failed miserably on the three things that young people are not. They're not having any of it. They're just not. And as long as the church maintains, the fundamental evangelical church maintains that homosexuality is a sin and it's an abomination to God and it's a curable disease or it can be prayed away, as long as they hold on to the theology that women are subservient, submissive, second-class citizens, in some cases not allowed to serve in leadership positions within the church, and as long as they are maintaining, a lot of them are maintaining, that Islam is a satanic religion, or Islam is every Muslim out there is somehow holds the same radical Islamic views as the terrorists do. As long as they hold on to these three things, the church is going to continue to falter, and it's going to continue to lose membership until it's dead, and just not going to exist anymore. And there's a very real chance that this might happen in our lifetime. So you ask yourself, well, how did this happen? Because those of us who remember the 60s, remember that, it was a generation of love and peace and kindness and inclusion and just it was an era of permissiveness. And if taken to its logical conclusion, that should have developed into a church that is equally as inclusive and permissive and has changed with the times. But what happened is, back in the 1970s, the church went political. It started to go political. Guns, God, and glory. That seems to be what happened to us. Paul Weyrich and his crew with the Moral Majority and Tim LaHaye and Jerry Falwell and Pat Robertson and that crowd, from the 70s to the 80s, they co-opted the Republican Party and they politicized Christianity. What they did not count on, however, is that they would eventually grow old, and in some cases grow old and die, and the people that came after them weren't going to hold the same ideals that they do. They weren't going to hold the same prejudices and the same bigotries that they do. So they built this machine. They built this religio-political regime that they thought was going to be their legacy, that they thought was going to preserve the church and preserve their outdated and draconian ideas, that the psychology was going to change. They didn't count on the fact that all of the major mental health agencies have decided, rightfully so, that homosexuality is not a disease. They didn't count on the first and the second and the third wave of feminism. They didn't count on the fact that Christians were going to be going to school and college and hang out with people that have different faiths and different ideas, and that they didn't count on the explosion of the World Wide Web with a plethora of information on it. And it's basically, the internet is where religions go to die, and this is where millennials, young, old, and Generation Xers live. They live on the internet. The old people, the old folks from the 70s and 80s, when they built this regime of conservative evangelicalism, fundamentalism, did not count on this, and instead of it being their legacy, it is turning out it is their downfall. It was their suicide pact with their future generations. And the church today the American church today is committing suicide. It's dying by its own hand. And the sad thing is, if you are a Christian, the fact is, if you're anybody else, that this information is not top secret. This isn't a conspiracy theory. This isn't something that is hard to find. This information is out there. There are polls, there are interviews, there are statistics that back this up. But yet the church leaders are refusing to relent on on their views towards homosexuals and the views towards women and the views towards Islam, they won't back down. And because of that, they're stabbing themselves right in the gut, and they're killing themselves. And it really doesn't have to be that way. But church and state is the downfall of American Christianity. And personally, I don't think it's going to be around in a generation or two. And if it is, it's going to be in a vastly, vastly different format. It has to. It cannot last forever in the format that it is now. And all of the attempts to regulate persons or legislate and regulate human beings' sexuality or their gender or their own personal faith is it's having the opposite effect, and it won't work, and the numbers show it. It's going down, and that's just a fact of it. American Christianity, unfortunately, is a joke to the rest of the worldwide church. It's looked upon as a disease. It's looked upon as something that is an internal virus that is going to kill the faith. So my advice to church leaders: quit digging in. Quit digging in. It's going to be your end.